They won't all make it to Friday. The cardiologist's voice echoed through New York Presbyterian as Graham Hale stared at three daughters, Iris, Maeve, Lillian, wired to machines, 6 years old, 1 week to live. Then the new maid noticed something the doctors missed. Naomi Cruz, hired from Queens 4 days ago. When Iris crashed, Naomi stepped forward with techniques that shouldn't have worked: Spanish lullaby, precise positioning. A nurse asked who trained her. Naomi said nothing. But here's the twist. Naomi had illegally pre-screened Graham's daughters months earlier. Federal crime. Bought them time for an experimental protocol. And the person who reported her wasn't the hospital, it was Graham's own foundation, betting $8 million per child that they'd die before treatment could save them. Subscribe right now, because what happens when a billionaire burns his empire to save 3 lives will prove whether breaking every rule makes you a criminal or the only kind of person worth being. Won't all make it to Friday. The cardiologist didn't whisper it. His voice bounced off the glass corridor at New York Presbyterian in Manhattan, competing with the squeak of gurneys and the hiss of automatic doors. Graham Hale stood frozen, his Italian loafers planted on tiles that smelled like ammonia and panic. Behind the observation window, 3 girls, Iris, Maeve, Lillian, lay tangled in wires. 6 years old, identical faces, different machines. One monitor beeped faster than the others. Graham's jaw tightened. You're telling me I can't? Money doesn't accelerate bone marrow regeneration, Mr. Hale. The doctor adjusted his glasses, already turning toward the nurse's station. Their immune systems are attacking themselves. We're managing pain. That's the ceiling right now. Maeve pressed her palm against the glass from inside the room. Her lips moved. Daddy, am I going to die? Graham looked at the floor. Naomi Cruz stood 3 feet behind him, hands folded over her grey maid's uniform. She'd been hired 4 days ago through an agency in Astoria, Queen's emergency placement after Graham's regular staff walked out. Too much death in the house, they'd said. She watched the girls through the glass, counting breaths the way you do when you've done it before. The blonde one, Iris, had stopped blinking as much. The one in the middle, Lillian, kept pulling at her IV port. Maeve, smallest and loudest, stared at her father like he was supposed to fix this. Graham turned, noticed Naomi for the first time that hour. You, get coffee, black, now. She didn't move. Did you hear me? The one on the left, Naomi said quietly, nodding toward Iris. She's not responding to the saline drip the same way. Her breathing pattern shifted. Graham's face went red. You're a housekeeper. Stay in your lane. A nurse emerged from the room, peeling off gloves. She glanced at Naomi, then at the monitors, paused, went back inside. 30 seconds later, an alarm screamed. Doctors flooded the hallway. Graham slammed his fist into the wall. Naomi stepped closer to the glass, her reflection overlapping Iris's small body as hands moved fast around the bed. The alarm stopped. Iris was still breathing. A resident physician exited, pulling down his mask. He looked at Naomi. Who noticed the pattern change? Graham pointed at her. The resident tilted his head. Where were you trained? Naomi said nothing. By 11 p.m., the girls were being transferred under armed privacy to a medical suite in Westchester County, closer to a research hospital in Valhalla. Graham's lawyers controlled the hallway. His money controlled the silence. Naomi followed with the laundry. And she noticed something else the doctors hadn't. The suite in Westchester County didn't feel like a hospital. Hardwood floors, recessed lighting, a couch that cost more than most people's cars. But the machines still hissed, and the girls still looked small. Graham paced near the window, overlooking the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care if the board meets next quarter. Move the vote to Monday. My daughters are... He stopped, turned, saw Naomi adjusting Lillian's blanket. What are you doing? Naomi straightened. The IV line was pulling. She kept shifting. The nurses handle that. They're rotating every 4 hours. She needs consistency. Graham crossed the room in 3 steps. His voice dropped to something colder than a shout. You were hired to clean linens and keep your mouth shut. You're the maid. Stay out of it. The words landed like a slap. Naomi's hands didn't shake. She met his eyes. Understood. She turned to leave. Then Iris started seizing. The monitor screamed. Maeve sat up in bed, screaming louder. Lillian froze, tears streaming. Graham barked into the hallway for the attending, but the door was locked from the outside security protocol during shift change. Naomi didn't ask permission. She moved to Iris, turned her on her side, cleared the airway. Her hands moved with the kind of precision that comes from muscle memory, not panic. She pulled the privacy curtain, dimmed the overhead light, and did something strunny. She set her phone on the bed, playing a Spanish lullaby so quietly it barely registered over the alarms. Lillian stopped shaking first. Maeve's pulse steadied on the monitor. Iris's eyes fluttered open. The door burst open. 2 nurses rushed in, followed by Graham's personal physician from a practice in White Plains. They checked vitals, adjusted dosages, exchanged glances. One nurse, older, grey bun, name tag read, Chen, stared at Naomi. Who trained you? Naomi wiped her hands on her uniform, said nothing. Nurse Chen looked at the monitor, then back at Naomi. That wasn't luck. Graham stood in the corner, fists clenched, watching. If you're still here, it's because you know something doesn't add up. And if you leave now, you'll never know what Naomi's hiding, or why 3 dying girls just stabilized under her hands instead of a team of doctors. The physicians scribbled notes, muttering about cortisol suppression and autonomic response. But Nurse Chen kept watching Naomi, the way you watch someone who's pretending to be invisible. At 2:11 a.m., Graham found Naomi in the kitchenette, staring at a cup of cold coffee. Her eyes were red. If you interfere again, he said, I'll have security remove you from the building. Naomi looked up. Her voice was steady. They need to be treated like they're staying. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Graham opened his mouth to respond. A knock at the door. A man in a dark coat stood in the hallway, briefcase in hand, research physician, flown in from Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. He carried consent forms for an experimental protocol. 3 signatures required. 1 per child. The risk section ran 3 pages. The physician from Johns Hopkins spread the paperwork across the conference table like he was dealing cards. His name was Dr. Vikram Patel. He'd landed at Westchester County Airport 90 minutes ago, briefcase handcuffed to his wrist until he reached the building. Graham scanned the first page. His hands stopped moving halfway down. Experimental immunotherapy cocktail, Patel said, targets autoimmune collapse at the cellular level. We've seen partial remission in 4 out of 11 cases. 4 out of 11, Graham repeated. The other 7 didn't respond. 3 experienced accelerated organ failure. Patel didn't blink. This isn't a guarantee, Mr. Hale. It's a calculated gamble. The room smelled like leather and desperation. Outside, snow had started falling over Valhalla, covering the parking lot in silence. Inside, the only sound was Graham turning pages. What's the alternative? Palliative care, comfort, time. How much time? Patel hesitated. Days, maybe a week. Graham's jaw worked. He flipped to the consent forms. 3 identical documents. Iris, Maeve, Lillian. Each required a parent's signature. Each came with a legal waiver thick enough to stop a bullet. If I sign this, Graham said slowly, and they die anyway, you won't be liable. Neither will we. That's what the waiver covers. That's not what I'm asking. Patel leaned back. Then what are you asking? Graham didn't answer. He stared at the signature lines. 3 blank spaces that felt like traps. His entire life had been built on control mergers, acquisitions, hostile takeovers. He'd never signed anything he couldn't undo. This was different. A soft knock at the door. Naomi entered with a tray, water, coffee, nothing either man had requested. She set it down, started to leave. "Wait," Patel said. She stopped. "You're the one who stabilized the Hale child earlier." Nurse Chen mentioned it. Naomi's face stayed neutral. "I helped reposition her." "Repositioning doesn't drop a heart rate from 140 to 98 inches under 2 minutes. Patel studied her. "What did you do?" "I stayed calm." "That's not an answer." Graham cut in. "She's domestic staff. This doesn't concern her." But Patel wasn't looking at Graham anymore. He was looking at Naomi, the way a scientist looks at an anomaly. "Have you read the literature on autonomic nervous system regulation in pediatric trauma cases?" Naomi hesitated. "Just a second." But it was enough. "You have," Patel said quietly. The air in the room shifted. Graham stood. "Get out, Naomi." She left without a word, but Patel watched her go, his expression unreadable. Graham picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the first signature line. Iris Hale. Consent for experimental treatment. Risk of death. Significant. He thought about board meetings, quarterly earnings, the things he could control. Then he thought about Maeve asking if dying hurt. He signed. Then again. Then a third time. Patel collected the forms, slid them into his briefcase. Transport leaves at 6 a.m. They'll be moved to a trial facility in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Isolated environment. Strict observation. Will it work? Patel stood. Ask me in 72 hours. He walked out. Graham sat alone in the dark, staring at his hands. In the hallway, Naomi stood by the linen cart, listening to everything. The helicopter touched down at the trial facility in Allegheny County at 7:43 a.m. The building sat tucked between Pittsburgh's industrial corridor and farmland that hadn't been developed yet. Anonymous, deliberate, no signs, just a number on the door. Inside, the girls were placed in a shared suite. White walls, observation cameras in every corner. A nurse from Erie checked vitals every 90 minutes. The protocol began immediately. IV drips that smelled like copper and tasted like fear. By Wednesday afternoon, something shifted. Iris asked for crayons. Not permission, just crayons, like it was normal to want things again. Maeve laughed at a joke that wasn't funny, the kind of laugh that meant her lungs were working. Lillian sat up without help and ate 3 bites of applesauce. Graham stood in the observation room, watching through one-way glass. For the first time in a week, his shoulders dropped. Naomi folded towels in the corner. She didn't smile, but her hands moved slower. Relief looked different on her, quieter. Then a woman in a grey pantsuit walked into the observation room. No introduction. She carried a tablet and the kind of authority that doesn't need a name tag. "Mr. Hale," she said. "I'm with Compliance Review out of Harrisburg. We need to discuss an irregularity." Graham's face went blank. "What kind of irregularity?" She tapped the tablet. "Your daughters were pre-screened for this protocol months ago, before the trial opened to new participants." "That's impossible. I only learned about this protocol 5 days ago." "I'm aware." She turned the screen toward him. "But someone accessed their medical records in March. Someone ran genetic markers, immunological panels, preliminary compatibility assessments." Graham stared at the data. Dates, timestamps, access logs. "Who?" The compliance officer zoomed in on a signature line at the bottom of the file. "Naomi Cruz, RN, license #74819TX, inactive." The room went silent. Graham turned slowly. Naomi had stopped folding towels. Her hands were flat against the table. "You," he said. She didn't deny it. "You accessed my daughter's files? Illegally?" "Yes." "Why?" Naomi's voice was steady. "Because I recognized the symptoms. I knew this protocol existed, and I knew if someone didn't pre-screen them, they'd never get approval in time. The compliance officer stepped forward. Miss Cruz, unauthorized access to trial data is a federal violation. If the hospital discovers this breach, the protocol will be shut down immediately. Your daughters will be removed from treatment, Mr. Hale. Graham's face drained of color. Wait. Policy is non-negotiable. The officer closed her tablet. I'm required to escalate this to the ethics board by end of business today. She walked out. Graham stood frozen. The girls were laughing behind the glass. Iris was drawing. Maeve was singing off-key. Lillian was asking for more apple sauce. They were getting better, and it was all about to stop. He turned to Naomi. His voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? You wouldn't have listened. You broke the law. I did. They'll shut this down because of you. Naomi met his eyes. They'll shut it down because someone reported it. And I didn't report it. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Graham's phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. Compliance officer just left the building. Headed toward state offices in Harrisburg. ETA, 90 minutes. He had an hour and a half before everything collapsed. Behind the glass, Iris held up a drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. Graham's hands started shaking. Graham found her in the stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floors, the kind of space that smelled like disinfectant and forgotten mop water. Emergency exit signs cast everything in red. Naomi stood with her back against the concrete wall, arms crossed. Talk, Graham said. There's nothing to say that changes what happens next. You accessed confidential medical records. You falsified pre-screening data. You put my daughters in a trial under fraudulent pretenses. His voice echoed. So yeah, Naomi, talk. She looked at him for a long time. Then she spoke. I was a pediatric ICU nurse, Bexar County, Texas, San Antonio. I worked trauma and terminal cases for 6 years. Her voice didn't shake. My license was revoked in 2019. Why? Because I tried to enroll my daughter in this same protocol. She was 6. Same autoimmune collapse. Same countdown. Naomi's jaw tightened. The hospital said she didn't meet eligibility criteria. Too high risk. I appealed. I begged. I submitted every piece of data I had. And they denied her. Twice. She exhaled slowly. So I pre-screened her myself. Illegally, just like I did for your daughters. I submitted falsified compatibility reports to push her through the approval process. Graham's expression didn't change. What happened? They found out. My license was suspended pending investigation. By the time the ethics board finished deliberating, she'd been off the wait list for 11 days. Naomi's voice cracked, just once. She died in a hospice facility in Travis County. 14 months ago. The stairwell went silent. Graham stared at her. You lost your daughter because you tried to save her. I lost my daughter because the system moves slower than disease. Naomi pushed off the wall. When I saw your girl's symptoms in a medical journal, autoimmune markers, the onset pattern I knew what was coming. So I accessed their records through a registry backdoor I still had from my old hospital network. I ran the pre-screening. I flagged them as priority candidates. You bought them time. I bought them a chance. If you're watching this, and you've ever fought a system that didn't care how much you love someone, you already know why Naomi did it. And if you leave now, you'll never see whether breaking the rules to save a life makes you a criminal or the only honest person in the room. Graham's phone buzzed again. Text from his lawyer. Ethics board convening in 48 minutes. If they vote to remove the girls from protocol, there's no appeal. He looked at Naomi. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? Would you have let a disgraced nurse with a dead child anywhere near your daughters? He didn't answer. Exactly, she said. Graham turned toward the stairs. Security is downstairs. They'll escort you out. Naomi nodded. I know. "You're fired." "I know that too." He started down the stairs, stopped halfway, didn't turn around. "For what it's worth, thank you." Naomi didn't respond. By the time she reached the lobby, 2 guards were waiting. They walked her to the curb in silence. She didn't fight, didn't cry, just stood there in the cold, watching the building through glass doors. Inside, the ethics board was already gathering in a conference room on the 5th floor. And upstairs, in the isolation suite, Maeve's monitor started beeping irregularly. Then Lillian's, then Iris's. Without Naomi's interventions, the hydration, timing, the positioning, the quiet adjustments, no one else noticed the girls' bodies were crashing. Graham sprinted down the hallway, screaming for the attending physician. But it was already too late. The attending physician arrived within 90 seconds. Dr. Patel was right behind him, still wearing his coat from the helicopter pad. They flooded the suite with personnel nurses from the night shift in Butler County, a respiratory specialist flown in from Cleveland, a pharmacologist who'd been asleep in the on-call room. But nothing worked the way it had before. Iris's oxygen saturation kept dropping. Maeve's temperature spiked to 103.7. Lillian stopped responding to verbal cues, eyes half open but focused on nothing. "Where's the protocol deviation?" Patel barked, scanning charts. "What changed in the last 2 hours?" A nurse from Erie checked the IV flow rates. "Everything's consistent with yesterday's regimen." "Then why are they crashing?" No one answered. Graham stood against the wall, hands gripping the back of a chair hard enough to leave marks. He watched 3 teams work on 3 daughters, and all he could think about was Naomi standing in the stairwell, telling him the truth he didn't want to hear. They need to be treated like they're staying. The medical staff treated them like experiments. Naomi had treated them like children. At 4:17 p.m., Maeve coded. Alarms screamed. Compressions started. Graham tried to get closer, but a nurse blocked him. "Sir, you need to step back." "That's my daughter." "Sir." Patel worked fast, calling orders in a voice that cut through chaos. "Epinephrine. Defibrillator charged to 50 joules. 1 shock. 2. Maeve's small body jerked against the bed. Nothing. Graham's knees buckled. A security guard caught him before he hit the floor. 3rd shock. Maeve gasped. The monitor beeped, irregular but present. Graham collapsed into a chair, hands covering his face. Patel stepped into the hallway, pulling off his gloves. His face was grey. Graham followed him. "Call her back," Graham said. "Who?" "Naomi, the nurse. The one I fired." Patel shook his head. "She's not credentialed. If she's caught on premises after termination, the hospital's liable. The trial gets flagged. We lose federal clearance." "I don't care about liability." "You should. Because if this protocol collapses, your daughters don't just leave the trial. They lose access to any experimental treatment, permanently. That's how ethics violations work." Graham stared at him. "So, what do I do?" "You pray the next 48 hours go better than the last 2. Patel walked away. Graham pulled out his phone, searched for Naomi's number in the staffing agency contact list. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. At 6:52 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe storm warning for Allegheny, Westmoreland, and Butler counties. Thunderstorms with damaging wind, possible power disruptions across northern Pennsylvania and extending into New Jersey. By 8:30 p.m., the sky outside turned green. Inside the facility, backup generators hummed to life as a precaution. The girls were stable barely. Iris hadn't opened her eyes in 2 hours. Lillian's breathing was shallow. Maeve's heart rate kept spiking. Graham sat between their beds, holding 3 small hands, wondering how a man with enough money to buy a hospital couldn't keep his daughters breathing. At 9:41 p.m., lightning struck a transformer 3 miles away. The lights went out. Emergency systems kicked in immediately, red exit signs, battery-powered monitors. But the main generator, the one that powered the IV pumps and climate control, didn't engage. A technician sprinted down the hallway. "Transfer relays fried. We're trying to reroute." "How long?" Patel shouted. 15 minutes. Maybe 20. In the dark, Maeve's monitor started beeping faster. Graham looked at the window. Rain hammered the glass. And in the parking lot, under a broken streetlight, Naomi Cruz sat in her car. She'd never left. The backup generator didn't come back online in 15 minutes. Or 20. The technician returned at the 30-minute mark, soaked in rain, carrying a burnt relay board. "Main system's dead. We're running on battery reserves. IV pumps, monitors, ventilation, everything's pulling from the same source." "How long do the batteries last?" Patel asked. 4 hours. Maybe 5 if we're lucky. Graham checked his watch. 10:17 p.m. Maeve's oxygen saturation was dropping. 91%. 88%. 85%. Iris hadn't moved in 40 minutes. Lillian's lips were turning blue. Patel made a call to a sister facility in Somerset County. "We need an emergency transfer, 3 critical patients, autoimmune protocol." The voice on the other end cut him off. "Roads are closed. Route 22's flooded near Blairsville. State police aren't letting anything through until morning." Patel hung up. Looked at Graham. Said nothing. Graham's hands were shaking. He'd spent his entire adult life in boardrooms, negotiating deals that moved millions, destroying competitors with signatures. He'd never felt powerless. Until now. At 11:03 p.m., a nurse approached him with a clipboard. "Mr. Hale, we need updated consent signatures. The protocol's been modified due to the power situation. We're manually regulating the IV drips. It changes the liability structure." Graham stared at the forms. 3 signature lines, again, but this time the language was different. "In the event of equipment failure, the facility assumes no responsibility for adverse outcomes resulting from manual intervention." Translation: if his daughters died in the dark, no one was legally responsible. He picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the first line. Then he did something he'd never done before. He signed his name. Then he signed it again. Different handwriting, slightly altered loop on the G. Then a third time. Shakier. Desperate. 3 consent forms. 3 daughters. 1 parent. He'd just forged his own signature twice. It was illegal. It was fraud. It was the only way to keep the protocol active through the night. Without his ex-wife's presence, she was unreachable. Somewhere over the Atlantic, on a flight from London. Graham handed the clipboard back to the nurse. She didn't look closely, just filed it. He sat down between the beds, holding 3 small hands in the dark. Outside, thunder rolled across Allegheny County. Rain turned the parking lot into a shallow lake, and in her car, Naomi watched the building through fogged windows. She'd been sitting there for 2 hours, telling herself to leave, to go back to Queens, to let the system finish what it started. But she couldn't. She saw the lights flicker, saw the emergency reds glow brighter, saw personnel moving faster through the windows. She knew what that meant. At 11:47 p.m., she got out of the car. Rain soaked through her jacket in seconds. She walked to the side entrance, the one the laundry service used. The lock was electronic dead without power. She pulled the door. It opened 6 inches, caught on the manual override latch. She slipped through. A distracted security guard sat at the front desk, watching his phone, waiting for the lights to come back. He didn't see her move past the stairwell, didn't hear her footsteps on the tile. Naomi reached the 3rd floor, the isolation suite. The door was propped open protocol during power failure. Inside, she saw Graham sitting in the dark, head bowed, lips moving. He was praying. She'd never seen a billionaire pray before. Maeve's monitor started screaming. Flatline. Naomi moved before anyone else could process what the flatline meant. She crossed the room in 4 steps, positioned herself over Maeve's small chest, and started compressions, 30 per cycle, 2 inches deep. Her hands moved with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this too many times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Graham stumbled backward, hitting the wall. Patel rushed in, saw Naomi, froze. "How did you—" "Not now," she said, not breaking rhythm. 15, 16, 17. A nurse ran for the crash cart, but the defibrillator needed power. Battery backup only. Patel grabbed the manual bag valve mask, started rescue breathing in sync with Naomi's compressions. 28, 29, 30. Naomi's voice cracked. Tears hit the sheets. "Breathe." Patel squeezed the bag. Nothing. "Again," Naomi said. Another cycle. Compressions. Breathing. The monitor stayed flat. Iris started crying in the next bed. Lillian screamed for her sister. "Come on," Naomi whispered. "Come on, baby. Stay." 40 seconds in, the lights surged back. Generators roared to life. Monitors blinked on. The defibrillator charged. Patel grabbed the paddles. Clear. Shock. Maeve's body jerked. Still flat. Again. Second shock. The line jumped, spiked, settled into an irregular rhythm. Maeve gasped. Naomi collapsed against the bed, forehead pressed to the mattress, shoulders shaking. Graham slid down the wall to the floor, hands covering his face. Then the door opened. 2 state police officers entered, followed by the compliance officer from Harrisburg. Behind them, a man in a tailored suit Graham recognized immediately. Warren Dietrich, CFO of the Hale Foundation. Based in Wilmington, Delaware. Graham stood slowly. "What the hell are you doing here?" Dietrich didn't smile. "Mr. Hale, we need to discuss a significant legal matter. The compliance investigation into your daughter's trial enrollment. It originated from within your own foundation." The room went silent. "What?" "6 weeks ago, your daughters were enrolled in a trust managed by the foundation. The policy includes a clause that pays out $8 million per child in the event of death from natural causes, provided no experimental medical intervention occurs." Graham's face drained of color. "You're saying—" "The pre-screening flagged them for experimental treatment. That threatened the payout structure. So yes, Mr. Hale, I made the call to Harrisburg. I reported the ethics violation." Naomi stood. Her voice was ice. "You tried to kill them for money. I protected the foundation's financial interests," Dietrich said calmly. "That's my job." Graham crossed the room in 2 strides. Security stepped between them before his fist connected. "You work for me," Graham said, voice shaking. "You report to me. I report to the board." And the board voted to protect the trust. The compliance officer cleared her throat. "Mr. Hale, I'm required to inform you that the trial protocol is now under formal investigation. Given the fraudulent pre-screening, the falsified consent forms, and the unauthorized personnel breach." She glanced at Naomi. "We're shutting it down. Effective immediately." Patel stepped forward. "You can't. We can. And we are." Graham looked at his daughters. Maeve, barely breathing. Iris, terrified. Lillian, crying. Then he looked at Dietrich. "I'm waiving attorney-client privilege," Graham said quietly. "Every communication, every email, every recorded board meeting where this payout clause was discussed." Dietrich's expression shifted. "You can't do that. Watch me." Graham pulled out his phone. "I'm also filing an emergency motion with the federal court in Cook County, Illinois, where this trial originated. I'm requesting an exemption on humanitarian grounds." The compliance officer hesitated. "That could take weeks." "It'll take 4 hours if I call the right judge." He started dialing. Dietrich left the room without another word. The officers followed. Naomi stood by Maeve's bed, hands still shaking, watching Graham become someone different than the man who'd hired her 2 weeks ago. At 1:33 a.m., the phone call ended. The protocol would continue. Emergency exemption granted. But the cost was everything Graham had spent 30 years building. His foundation, his board, his control. Gone. The protocol continued through the night, but the room felt different now. Thinner, like the air itself was holding its breath. Maeve stabilized, but barely. Her heart rate jumped between 140 and 170. Iris's fever climbed to 104.2 despite ice packs across her chest and neck. Lillian stopped responding to her name entirely, eyes open but unseeing. Naomi stayed. No one asked her to leave. No one dared. She moved between the beds like a ghost, adjusting pillows, checking IV sites, whispering in Spanish the way her own daughter used to ask her to. Graham watched from the corner, learning what presence without control looked like. At 3:47 a.m., Lillian's oxygen saturation dropped to 82%. Patel adjusted the flow rate. Nothing changed. 80%. "We need to intubate," a nurse from Butler County said. "She's too fragile," Patel replied. "Intubation could trigger respiratory collapse." 78%. Naomi stepped forward. "Let me try something." Patel hesitated, then nodded. Naomi sat on the edge of Lillian's bed, lifted her gently, and positioned her upright against her chest. She started humming low, rhythmic, the same lullaby she'd played for them weeks ago. Her hand moved in circles on Lillian's back, counting beats. 30 seconds passed. Lillian's breathing deepened. The monitor climbed. 80%. 83%. 87%. Patel stared. "How did you?" "Positional drainage. Reduces fluid pressure on the diaphragm." Naomi didn't look up. "We used it in San Antonio for kids who couldn't tolerate mechanical ventilation." Graham stood. "Why didn't the staff try that?" "Because it's not in the protocol," Patel said quietly. "It's not something you learn from a textbook." At 4:52 a.m., Iris's fever broke. At 5:18 a.m., Maeve asked for water. At 6:03 a.m., Lillian opened her eyes and said, "I'm hungry." The sunrise came through the window in streaks of gold and grey, cutting across 3 small faces that looked less like death and more like children again. Graham stood between their beds, hands in his pockets, trying to remember how to breathe without fear. Then Maeve looked at him. "Daddy, where's Naomi?" He turned. She was gone. Panic hit him like cold water. He ran into the hallway, checked the stairwell, the break room, the parking lot. Her car was still there. He found her in the chapel on the first floor, a small room with 6 chairs and a wooden cross on the wall. She sat in the back row, staring at nothing. Graham sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Naomi said, "I couldn't save my daughter, but I didn't let yours die without a fight." Graham's voice cracked. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I broke every rule." "So did I." She looked at him. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a father. "If you're still here, it's because you need to see how this ends. Because you need to know if breaking every rule to fight for someone you love makes you a criminal or the only kind of person worth being. Hit subscribe, because what happens 5 years from now will prove that some fights are worth losing everything for. 2 days later, there was a birthday cake. Small, lopsided, made by a nurse who'd never baked before. 3 girls sang off-key, voices hoarse but loud. Naomi stood by the door, holding balloons. Graham sat beside them, quieter than before, learning what it meant to be present instead of in control. It felt like an ending. But in the hallway, the compliance officer stood with new paperwork. The investigation wasn't over. The Foundation's lawsuit wasn't over. The ethics board wasn't finished. The fight had just changed shape. And the storm outside hadn't passed. It had only moved east, toward New Jersey, where another family would soon be facing the same countdown. But that's a different story. The soccer field in Travis County, Texas, sat between a highway and a stretch of live oaks that had been there longer than the county itself. Dust kicked up whenever the wind changed direction, coating cleats and shin guards in red clay. 3 girls ran until their lungs burned. Iris played forward, fast and reckless, the kind of player who didn't wait for permission to take the shot. Maeve hung back on defense, calculating angles, positioning herself where the ball would be instead of where it was. Lillian stayed in goal, shouting instructions no one followed, but somehow always in the right place when it mattered. They didn't look sick. They didn't move like survivors. They just looked like kids. Naomi stood on the sideline, hands in the pockets of a jacket that had seen better days. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with grey she didn't bother covering. Legal guardian, the paperwork said, but the girls just called her Naomi, the way they always had. Graham sat 2 rows back on the bleachers, quieter than he used to be. He didn't check his phone during games anymore, didn't take calls, didn't run the world from a metal bench in Central Texas. He'd moved to Austin 6 months after the protocol ended, sold the townhouse on East 74th Street, dissolved what remained of the foundation, walked away from the board seats and the quarterly reports and the life that had almost cost him everything. Now he ran a small non-profit out of a rented office near the University of Texas campus, helping families navigate experimental medical trials. He wasn't good at it yet, but he was learning. Maeve scored. The crowd, parents, siblings, a couple of dogs cheered. She ran back to center field, grinning, and high-fived Iris. Naomi's phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Cruz, this is Dr. Patel. I'm working with a family in Fairfax County, Virginia. Autoimmune collapse. 3 children. They need someone who understands what's coming. Can you call me?" She stared at the screen for a long time. Graham noticed. Walked down from the bleachers, stood beside her. "Another one?" "Yeah." "You going?" Naomi looked at the field. At 3 girls who weren't supposed to make it to their 7th birthday, now 12 years old, and arguing about offsides rules. "I don't know," she said. Graham nodded. "For what it's worth, you taught me something." "What's that?" "That the people who break the rules to save lives aren't criminals." He paused. "They're just the ones who couldn't live with themselves if they didn't try." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. The referee blew the final whistle. The game ended. The girls ran toward the sideline, sweaty and loud, talking over each other about a play that may or may not have been a penalty. Iris hugged Naomi first. "Did you see my goal?" "I saw all of them." Maeve grabbed her water bottle. "We're getting pizza, right?" "We're always getting pizza." Lillian looked up at Graham. "You coming?" He smiled. "Yeah, I'm coming." They walked toward the parking lot together, 3 girls, a disgraced nurse, and a man who used to believe money could fix anything. If you're still watching, it's because you already know this story wasn't about medicine or miracles. It was about who steps forward when the system says no, and who refuses to treat dying children like a foregone conclusion. They weren't saved by wealth. They weren't saved by science alone. They were saved because one woman looked at 3 girls on a countdown and said, "Not on my watch." And because one man finally learned that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't disease. It's the belief that some lives matter more than the rules designed to protect them. 5 years later, the girls were running, and the people who loved them were still fighting.